Hello and welcome to episode 184 of Page One, the Writers' Podcast. I'm Marco.
I'm Tarek.
And thanks for joining us on the podcast where we like to speak to writers of all kinds about their writing journeys, find out how they got into the industry and try and get as many hints and tips as possible. I feel I should probably change my intro there. I say the same thing I could just play a tape. That bit of it. But everything I said there is true. And if you haven't checked out our back catalogue, this is the other bit I always say, then please do go and check that out, because we've had some great authors and also industry experts like agents and editors on the podcast. So you can listen to those or even watch some of them on our YouTube channel as well. We joked last week that we always have a great guest on this week, and surprisingly, unfortunately, surprisingly, this week is no exception. We do have another great guest and a local guest as well.
Yes, we have another wonderful local Scottish writer. His name is Mr. Gareth Brown, and he has written The Book of Doors, which is his debut novel.
Which has been a huge hit already.
It's been a huge hit. Foreign rights in 20 countries. It's been reviewed amazingly well. It's on all the Waterston's tables at the front of the shop with that perfect splashy entrance. And it's a really good chat we have with him. He's a very pragmatic writer. You know, it wasn't the first book he wrote, like many authors. It wasn't the first book he wrote. It was the first book that got picked up, and he kind of chats about working out.
Well, it wasn't even the first book that got picked up. He got picked up for a different book by his agent.
By his agent, yes.
So he almost wrote this one. We have a good discussion in it about sort of art against commercialism, and Gareth's got quite a pragmatic approach to it about, you've always got to think, if you want the book to sell, then you have to think about what is going to sell, kind of a thing. Yeah. And I don't think that's a dirty thing to do as a writer.
And funnily, we just wrapped up a chat with a very intriguing agent, and he had some very interesting thoughts about there's no right or wrong way of being an author. It's all about just being honest with yourself, what you want from your writing. Yeah. Do you want to be commercial? Do you want to make a lot of money and be on the supermarket shelves? Do you want to be known for as a really good writer but not sell very well? But what do you want? And there's no wrong path.
I think that's
it's all
right.
About being honest with yourself.
Definitely. And so some really great advice and interesting insight from Gareth. So we'll get straight to it after a quick advert for our writer's notebook, and then we'll be back at the end of the podcast with a bit more chat and to let you know about next week's guest.
But for now, on with the podcast.
The blank page. To some, it's terrifying, an obstacle to overcome. But we prefer to think of it as an opportunity, a blank canvas to be filled with all of the adventures and characters in our head. So how to overcome that fear? Well, we all know the best advice for a writer is write. Seriously, get words on the page and more will follow.
But what about later, when you start trying to pull those threads of what you've written together? What about the character you wrote about way back at the start? Who was she again? What was she carrying? And where did she leave the MacGuffin that she now really needs in the third act? Think about all those top thrillers you like to read, or that amazing drama you just watched. What did they all have in common? Structure and planning.
As aspiring writers ourselves, we've tried many different methods to try and organise all the thoughts about the stories we want to tell. We've been there searching for a piece of scrap paper to note something down, or making a quick note on our phone in between meetings.
Or sometimes we'll make a note in whatever notebook we're carrying, or a document on our laptop so we don't forget that great idea. Let's be honest, it can all be a bit messy and it's easy to lose track of everything. And that's when we realise it's not just the story that needs structure and planning, but the way we gather all of our thoughts about it as well.
And so we made Page One. Page One is more than just another notebook. It's a place to put down all your ideas for your latest project, divided into easy-to-use sections that will help you plan your story, so that when that blank page comes calling, you're ready to answer. And then afterwards, once it's written, we realised you need to plan how to let people read it, so we included a section relating to submissions.
Each one is designed for one project, whether you want to write a book, screenplay, a comic, or any other kind of story. We truly believe that when you use it, it will help you get to the main event, writing your story. So we hope this helps.
We can't wait to read what you come up with.
And remember, every story starts with page one.
as you have listened to our podcast before, you will know that I always start with the same question, which is, did you always want to be a writer? Because looking on your website, I see that you have been writing since you were a teenager.
Yeah, I think I wanted to be a writer before I knew I wanted to be a writer, if that makes sense. It probably doesn't make sense. When I was younger, I actually didn't read a lot of books until I was probably a teenager, but I was always really interested in stories, so TV and films I used to love. And I remember the first thing I ever really wanted to be was a film director, because I thought that's how you do stories, and that sounds cool.
Yeah.
And then I think it was in my teenagers, one of my friends at school told me, you should go and read this Stephen King book about haunted car. It's really cool. And I was like, that sounds crazy. But I read it and it was great. And it was the first sort of moment I had where, other than books you were told to read at school and you were going to get marked on, I chose to read something and enjoyed it, and it made me want to read more. And I think at that moment I thought, oh, this is what I want to do. I want to tell stories. And if I'm writing books, I don't need to worry about other people. I can just do my own thing. You know, it's purely personal. And from that point on, as a teenager, I can quite clearly remember thinking, I want to be a writer. I'm going to be a writer. And I remember starting to write short stories. Any opportunity for writing a short story at school, like in English, you know, do a creative thing or do an analytical thing. I'll do a creative thing. Exams, I'll write a short story in my exam. And then I started writing novel-length things probably in my teens, you know, rubbish Stephen King knockoffs, because I just wanted to be Stephen King for a while.
Very fair.
Who doesn't?
Very fair, indeed.
Exactly,
yeah. So I tried to do rubbishy horror knockoffs for a long time, but like from 16, 17, 18, I was writing not very good novel-length things and submitting them to agents in the days when you used to print off A4 pages and stick them in a brown envelope and wait 3 months for them to send you it back. And I was convinced I was going to be, you know, rich and famous by the time I was 26, because Stephen King was, and we're all as good as him. And it didn't happen, obviously, but I was writing all through my life. I've been writing. I ended up working in the UK civil service, and now I work in the NHS. But I took that job in the civil service initially just to pay the bills until I became rich and famous. And I haven't become rich and famous yet, but I've finally got the deal. So it's been 20 plus years, 25 years. And I wasn't writing consistently over that period, but I always had the idea in my head that I wanted to write. It's just life got in the way sometimes. I had quite a demanding job for a while, and I just didn't have the energy to come home and sit on a computer after sitting on a computer all day at work. So, and it was actually COVID probably freed me up a bit. I had no commuting to do, and I was at home more, and I dug something out of my desk drawer that I'd written a few years ago and just sort of brushed it up and sent it off. And that got me my agent. So that's kind of where it came from. It was really COVID gave me the opportunity to make the most of it. But always wanted to be a writer.
I was going to ask that. Yeah. So coming back to writing, you know, because I think a lot of people in those teenage years can have those sometimes unrealistic ambitions, I guess, and do a lot, but then real life gets in the way, and then many people don't pick it back up. So it sounds like it was actually the pandemic in a way that gave you the opportunity to revisit it.
I think I never wavered in the desire to be a writer. I think, and there was always moments when I thought, oh, I'm rubbish at this, it's never going to happen. You know, I'd had meetings with literary agents in the past, and then it didn't turn into anything, and you get knocked back and knocked back and knocked back. But there was a weird sort of kernel in me that always thought, I'm going to get published at some point. And I think that came from, maybe it was just a sort of a level of confidence that I had enough skill to get published, or I had enough ability, but also that I would persevere. But also, all through this journey, although it was quite a slow journey, everything I wrote was better than the previous thing I wrote. And I was always making steps forward. So I initially got, you know, personalized feedback from agents, even though they were saying, no, we can't take this, but this is good, your writing's good, but it's not right. I would write horror novels and they would say, nobody's buying horror novels, but your writing's good, try something else. I was like, well, that's good. And then I got a meeting with an agent, and even though it didn't turn into representation, I thought, well, that's a step forward. So every step I took, I was feeling like I was progressing. So I never got to just hitting a wall and nothing was happening. So I was always there. I don't think I ever really gave up on the dream. I think I was probably persistent and patient, though. I knew it might take time, and I was okay with that because I had a job that was paying the bills, and I was enjoying my job, and I had other things going on. But it was always what I wanted to do, and it just took COVID to give me a bit of space to find the right way to do it, or the right thing to write, or to edit it into the right sort of state. So, but it was always there. I never gave up on it.
And the stuff you were writing, because obviously you found an agent through the Book of Doors, which we'll chat about in a minute, and that's am I right in saying that's the first fantasy book you'd written? So what were you writing before that when you were, trying to find an agent, trying to get representation?
I actually didn't get my agent through the Book of Doors. I wrote a different book which was called The Invention of Time Travel, and it was about if time travel was possible, what would be the real world implications of that? Coming from a sort of policymaker perspective, what would be the implications in the real world? And I was, thinking about it from the perspective of justice and society and community and laws and all that kind of stuff. And I'd written that several years ago, and it always stuck in the back of my mind as I quite like that. There's things in it I like, and it was that I brushed up, and it was that got me my agent.
Okay.
But before that, I mean, I tried writing everything, to be honest. I spent a lot of time trying to write crime, police procedurals, thrillers, because that's what I read more of, or I did for a long time, reading more of those. I've never really written fantasy in the broadest sense. I wrote horror for a long time. I wrote a bit of speculative. And probably the Book of Doors in some ways connects a lot of the things I've tried to write in the past. So there's definitely thriller elements into it. I've consciously written it to try and have sort of thriller aspects. There is sort of light fantasy in it. It's a bit magic, but it's also quite grounded. There is definitely horror elements in it. There's little touches of horror that some people haven't liked and some people have loved. So it's almost like an amalgam of all the things I like. I read quite widely across genres, so and it has bits of everything in it. But I didn't get the agent with that. I got it with that time travel book that went out on sub, and we got some really nice feedback. People liked it, but it was that horrible thing of it was too sci-fi for the mainstream and not mainstream, not sci-fi enough for the sci-fi. So then I wrote another book with my agent. Clever Me wrote a book about a pandemic in the midst of COVID, and he sort of looked at me askance and said, "Nobody's going to buy this. write something else." So I pitched him
the whole book at that point.
Yeah, I'd written it as intended to be the second book of my 2-book deal that I would inevitably get off the Invention of Time Travel. And you have to write, because the submission process can take months. And I thought, well, I'll write something.
Yeah.
And I sort of pitched it to Harry as a sort of a thrillery type thing, but it ended up being quite a lot about a sort of a pandemic and lockdowns and things like that. And it's still a good book, but I think the timing wasn't right for it. And then I pitched him ideas. And one of the ideas was this idea I'd had for a long time, which was a fantasy idea, really like a swords and sorcery type fantasy of a Book of Doors, this device that you can turn any door into any other door. But partly as a result of COVID, I thought, well, if I could put that device in the real world, how would that work in sort of a contemporary setting? So I pitched that to him, and he was like, write that one. That's a book about books, and it's magic, and it quite got a broad appeal. So that will sell probably. And it did. So I wrote that in about 3.5 months, I think it was.
Oh, no, that's quite fast.
It was quite fast. And it kind of wrote itself. Sometimes you just hang on to the reins as the horse is galloping away from you. And this was one of those cases where it wrote quite fast. I mean, there was some problems I had to work out along the way, but it worked. It wrote quite fast. And then he took that and we submitted it. And yeah, we got that one sold. So it was quite a long journey from even getting an agent. It was about 3 or 4 years from getting the agent, I think, maybe 3 years. So again, that persistence and patience thing pays off. It's really easy just to go, I thought I was through the door. I thought I was in the the special place. And then your first book goes on submission and you hear nothing for 6 months. And you have to pick yourself up and keep going. Yeah. Which is what I did. So yeah.
And when you're writing a book like that you've been picked up for a different book that obviously you've completed, but then you have the chat and you had this idea for the Book of Doors, and in discussion with your agent, it sort of changed slightly. I mean, is it easier or harder to write something when it's not the book that you submitted and you wanted to? It's more a book, write this type of book because this is the one that I think I can sell, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, I think there's a few answers to that. One is I think there's a work ethic thing. If people ask me how do you become a writer, I always say to them, I've seen some people who just write and rewrite the same book, and you can't do that if you're a published author. You can't keep rewriting the same thing. You have to write whatever your level of productivity. You have to write more than one thing. So I think you have to accept you've written something and either it's not working or it's not working right now, and you move on to the other thing. So that first book that I got signed for with Harry, which is arguably in a different genre from the Book of Doors, I still think it's a good book, and Harry, my agent, has said he still thinks it's a good book, and there is a future in it at some point. It may be one of those out of the desk drawer books when I have a dry spell that I'll revisit. But I think the work ethic is important. You have to move on to the next thing. You have to keep producing. And arguably, I think, to be honest, the Book of Doors is probably a better book than the one that I got signed for. It's a different sort of book. It's definitely a more commercial book, as has been shown by the success it's had. But it was, I think I'd written 3 books between the one I got signed for with Harry and the Book of Doors. So I'd progressed, maybe even in small ways, as a writer in that period. And so it is a better book. So I don't feel bad that almost, I think of it, that the invention of time travel books served its purpose. It got me noticed by an agent. It got me to that next stage, and it showed somebody that I could write, the things that they wanted me to write. And then what I've done, and I think this is important when you're working with an agent, I've tried to show my agent and indeed publishers that it's not quite, I'll give you what you want, but it is very much, I've got a work ethic, and if you need things from me, I'll do my best to produce them to the best ability I can. And I think being able to demonstrate that work ethic shows to your publisher, to your agent, that you're invested in your own career, you want it to work, and you'll try your best. And I'm not going to just throw my toys out the pram if my favourite book doesn't get published immediately and have a sort of an artistic strop. I'm not very diva-ish. I'm quite pragmatic in that perhaps Scottish Presbyterian way. I'll just keep working. I'll produce something else. Give me another chance. I'll write you something else.
I think that's a really good point, because I think so many people, that kind of interplay between art and commercialism, and that kind of view that a lot of people have who think, rightly or wrongly, I've created this bit of work. It's not about the money. It's about getting out there. I don't want to compromise on my vision. And I'm going to keep working it until it's perfect. And at the same time, wanting to make a career out of it and making a living off it and make money off it, it's sometimes seen as a bad thing, or it's, you're not a proper artist or writer because you're writing stuff to sell as opposed to the whatever the great thing we all serve, etc. So it's I think if you want to make a career out of it, you do need to have that professionalism and that work ethic and say, you know what, I'm writing this to sell money and to make a living.
Absolutely.
If I ever get Stephen King level of fame where I can write whatever the hell I want whenever I want, it will sell, great. But for the time being, you're trying to break into an industry, there's certain hoops you have to jump through, isn't there?
And it's a commercial industry. I think it's great to say, well, I want to write pure artistic stuff that's entirely my vision. And if you accept that you might not get a big audience for that, that'll be entirely your vision. If you want to be a poet, you're never going to make a fortune being a poet, or it's very unlikely, but you might fulfill your own creative needs, and that's fine. Equally, it's totally fine to say, I want to write very commercial, potboilery thrillers that are very disposable, people enjoy them, and then they move on to the next one, and I'm going to write 2 of those a year for the next 10 years and make a lot of money. That's legitimate as well. They're both writing. When I got signed and when it looked like we were going to get published, I had a conversation with my wife, which was, look, all I've ever wanted is to be published. Most writers in the UK will make 10 grand a year if they're lucky. If I get a 10 grand advance, I'll stick 10 grand on the mortgage and be happy. And if I can go in a bookshop and see my book on a shelf, dream fulfilled. I'm not going to give up my day job, but that's unlikely anyway. That's always been the dream. And if you get more than that, it's a bonus. But if you seriously want to have a long commercial career, you have to pay attention to the commercial side of things. You have to listen to your publisher. Mm-hmm. You have to not be a diva. You have to be nice to work with apart from anything else. Be professional about it like you would in any other job. Listen to feedback, think about it, take it on, and listen to the expertise. And if you have a diva strop, people will see you having a diva strop. And I'm probably the least diva-ish person I know. Not that I know many diva-ish persons, but I'm pretty pragmatic about it. One of my friends said to me, what if you get lots of feedback from the editor and, it changes a lot of stuff? And I was like, well, I'll change it. If they want different things and it means they'll buy the book, I'm not precious about it. As long as I think I can do it to the best of my ability and I still like the final product. And there was one note, actually, one of the edits came in about, can you have a hint of romance? And I sort of pulled a face when I saw that. But then I thought, well, if that appeals to people, it's no skin off my nose. I can do it in a way that I think is credible. I can do it in a way that doesn't damage the plot. Why wouldn't I? Yeah. If it helps. So things like that.
Who know what potentially you're kind of trusting them, aren't you, to say, well,
exactly.
What
they want to make money off it.
Exactly.
So.
It's all exactly.
Yeah, so you've got to be pragmatic. I mean, if there's absolutely something, and to be fair, the relationship with editors has been really good. And they said to me, this is entirely, these are just suggestions. If there's something you absolutely don't like, but there was nothing about it that I absolutely didn't like. And maybe I'm pretty easygoing about it. It's still a good story. I still like it. And if it sells more, that's better for me in the long run.
Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, we've talked about it, but do you want to tell the listeners briefly about the Book of Doors?
Yeah, I will give you my very polished pitch, which I've deployed on many occasions over the last couple of months. So the Book of Doors is about a woman called Cassie Andrews who is living a quiet life as a bookseller in New York City. And then one winter's snowy day, she comes into possession of a very special book. a book that if she holds it in her hands, she can turn any door into any other door, so she can step through and be anywhere that she wants to be. And this is the Book of Doors, a sort of a magical book. So Cassie and her best friend are then sort of investigating everything that you can do with this book, having a great time, as you can imagine. And then they notice they're being followed, and they realise that they've fallen into a sort of secret, hidden world of money, power, and magic, because there are other magical books out there. The Book of Doors isn't the only one. And there are people who hunt for these books who would do anything to possess a book like the Book of Doors. And so Cassie ends up having to fight for herself, I suppose, fight for her friends, and I suppose ultimately fight for humanity. So it's, magic, it's escapism, it's thrills and spills. It's a bit of horror, a bit of darkness, lots of good fun.
And it's interesting that you said that, your first one, the invention of time travel, had that, thing that we've heard so much on this podcast, where it was it was too much of something but not enough of the other thing, so it never found its place. But the Book of Doors it is quite cross genre in what it touches, and yet it's sold amazingly well. So is there any logic in your head as to why that's happened?
So I think I always thought that the invention of time travel probably wasn't very commercial for a couple of reasons. One is it's written in a sort of Canterbury Tales sort of way. So there's sort of 6 almost standalone stories and then an interspersed thread. And these stories move through time to the sort of far future where you get a more sci-fi thing. And it starts in sort of almost contemporary times. And because of how I was feeling at the time when I wrote it, the first episode in that book is really all about British politics. It's kind of an analogy for Brexit, really. I was being annoyed about Brexit, so I sort of used time travel as a device for stupid politicians. And so the structure is not that commercial, 6 standalone stories and then a thread and then sort of looping back stuff. And so it's not an easily digestible thing. And the first thing being all about British politics, I kind of knew I was narrowing the potential interest of that to probably just a British publisher if we got one. So I think it probably wasn't very commercial. But interestingly, when I was writing the Book of Doors, a few people have asked me, why did you set it in New York? Mm-hmm. And there were 2 answers to that. Partly it was I just wanted to be in New York. I was writing it during COVID and I love New York and I wanted to travel. So I was sort of traveling vicariously. But I was consciously thinking, well, if I want this to be commercial, it will be more commercial to a wider audience, not just in the US, but to a wider audience if it uses some of the sort of the, popular culture. New York's a big thing. Yep. So I was consciously thinking this might broaden the commerciality of it, because British publishers will buy books set in the US, but US books publishers are more likely to buy books set in the US than they are in Britain. So that was maybe a learning thing from the invention of time travel, that if I just narrow it to a very British perspective, I might narrow the interest as well. So again, that's going back to trying to be professional about it. What's the best way to maximize interest in the book? And it was a conscious choice to think about American protagonists. Not just, there are Scottish people in it as well, but American protagonists in a very American setting.
That sort of international appeal clearly is correct, because you've obviously, it didn't only get picked up in the UK, it sold foreign rights in, I think, over 20 countries and stuff like that. So, do you think it is, having gone through it and having been in this search for publication for so long, do you think it is a case of what we always hear, which is that it's just the right timing, the right book at the right time in the right person's hands, essentially, that's come along, mixed with what you've already spoken about, having commercial things at the forefront of your mind when you're writing it?
So I think being a writer, all you can do is narrow your odds. You cannot control getting published or getting picked up by an agent, but what you can do is maximize your attractiveness. And that comes down to things like making sure your cover letter to your agent is as professional as it can be. Don't make it easy for them to, knock you out. So, and persistence as well pays off. It is a numbers game or a time game, I suppose. The longer you do it, the better you come, the more chances you have, the more likely you are to get picked up. I think luck is a huge part of it. I think timing is a huge part of it. You have to hit people in a mood where they're interested and, they're receptive. But like I say, you can narrow your odds. So writing a book about books, publishers love book about books because they think people love books about books. Writing a book that is commercial in the broadest sense, so that it could sit at the front of a bookshop rather than just in a genre section at the back. And I don't mean that pejoratively. I just mean you will sell more if your book's on the table at the front of Waterstones than if it's in the fantasy section 2 floors up. Writing it as well as you can. I'm a big believer in first sentences, first paragraphs, and first chapters are probably the most important thing you can write. It's so easy for people to say, I don't like this. Don't make it easy for people to not like your book. Keep them interested long enough that you're grabbing them. So I spend a lot of time rewriting the first chapter to make it as good as I possibly can. And all of that is just tactically making it as hard as possible for people to say no to you. And yeah, it's paid off. I think the big thing for me was it's a book about books. People love book about books. Publishers in particular love books about books. So yeah, we sold really quickly, surprisingly quickly. In fact, my agent went on holiday. He put our book out on submission, I think on a Thursday, and then he was going away to Italy for a week for a wedding or a friend's wedding or something. And he said, well, I'll touch back in with you when I get back from holiday. Because the previous book that we'd gone out with, the Invention of Time Travel one, it had been months until we heard anything. And I was like, that's fine. Submissions take months. And literally the next day he was setting up a meeting with one of the publishers. And then his whole holiday, he was sending me a message saying, I'm getting phone calls, I'm at the...
So you ruined his holiday, basically.
He ruined his own holiday by electing to put it out.
Timing, Harry.
I think we sold the UK deal in about 6 days, I think it was. And then we sold Germany the next day. And I think the US deal was like a week later or something. So it was ridiculous. It was like just an endless 2 weeks of this is crazy. It got to the point where, and I sort of joked about this with my agent, where when we didn't have a foreign rights deal coming through for a couple of weeks, I was like, well, I'm missing the bus. What am I going to do now? I'm not getting foreign rights deals. I've gone 2 days without it. But I'm being slightly silly about it. But yeah, we sold, I think it was 20 we're up to about in total. And a lot of those came in the first 3 or 4 months. And we've had a sort of a steady drip since then. So it's outrageous how well it's been taken up. And we've got South Korea now and Bulgaria, and the Arabic world rights have sold, and all these crazy places that I never thought we'd ever see one of my books. So yeah, it's been great. But I think a book about books, people love a book about books.
Yeah, and I can see that having international appeal, right enough.
Yeah,
certainly, yeah.
I wanted to ask you about the villain of the piece, because I read in an interview you said that you found something terrifying about a villain who reveals nothing about their thoughts, and and that made me think, because that's almost, it seems to fly in the face of a lot of writing advice, which I've read, which is, you should flesh your villains out as much as your hero characters, etc. And I've always viewed someone like Thanos in the Marvel movies as a good example of that. They spend like half the film on his character and his point of view and explaining his motivations and stuff. But you kind of almost seem to have gone the opposite way with that. And I wondered, how did you make that work? What's the secret there?
So I think the villain is fleshed out, but I think the comment I made, or I have made on several occasions, is that I liked the idea of a villain who didn't say very much. So you do see the villain, you do see their thoughts, we do spend some time with the villain, but when they're interacting with other people, they're not doing the blah ha ha, here's my big plan, I'm going to tell you about it. Because to me, that's not realistic. If you have a villain of the type that's in the Book of Doors, who is, I conceived of her almost as a sort of terrifying force of nature, where she would just sweep in, destroy things, and she cast this sort of shadow over the whole world, that people are in this world were aware of her and terrified of her. It's not the sort of person that'll sit and have a long conversation with you about what their plans are. They are an evil person. They're only concerned about themselves. They view the people they interact with as beneath them. It's like when you crush an insect, you don't tell the insect what you're going to do and why you're going to do it. Okay. That to me felt like a truer villain than like the Bond. The Hackney Bond villain.
Cheesy Bond. Now I'm going to explain my plan to you, and I've got you strapped to my chair. Yeah, exactly.
The villain is actually.
I think just on that point, I think there's a balance to be struck, though, isn't there? Because you need to, even if the villain isn't saying it outright in the speech to someone, you still need to understand the motivations. As a reader, otherwise you're not going to connect with the story.
Yeah, absolutely. And so in my first draft of the book, the villain said nothing. They were entirely silent. And through the edit, I had to have them say a few things for kind of plot mechanic purposes. But yes, and actually, it was one of the things the editor asked for more of, is more in the head of the villain. So I added in more sections from the villain's perspective. So they're not dialoguing, this is who I am and what I'm going to do, but you see it very much from their perspective. And those are some of the darkest bits of the book, to be honest, because of the type of villain. I wouldn't reveal spoilers, but because of who the villain is and why they are a villain, you get a real sense of that sort of sheer evil essence that they have through some of the things that we see them doing. And the feedback I've had from readers is, and it makes me happy actually. Quite a lot of people said, "Oh, that's the worst villain ever," and I couldn't get to sleep, and that villain has stuck with me. And I had a colleague at work who said it was giving them nightmares, and he had to stop reading. And I was like, "Yes, win, score. I'm giving you nightmares. I'm making people cry and giving them nightmares. That's my job done. I'm happy."
And obviously, you said you wrote this one quite quickly in about 3 months. I mean, I wanted to talk a bit about your process. Are you someone that will plan out a story in detail before you start writing it, or do you just have a vague idea and then see where it takes you?
Yeah, no, I'm a vague idea person. I did try planning a story once when I was writing a police procedural, and it was so boring writing it because I knew what was going to happen. I just couldn't find the energy to write it. So I know there are people who planners, and that works really well for them. And I'm a big believer in you have to do what works for you. But for me, I like to discover the story as I go along. And so for the Book of Doors, when I started, I had the concept of a Book of Doors, and I had the very first scene where Cassie, is the main character, discovers or ends up with the Book of Doors. And I had one other scene that ended up quite far in the book that I know I wanted to do, and I had nothing else. And I just started. And it does cause you problems because I was writing the book, and for a long time, I didn't really know who the villain was. So the villain we've just spoken about, it took me a long time to work out who they were. And there's another character in the book, Drummond Fox, who's a librarian, who for a long time, I couldn't work out what his motivation was. And I had a whole different subplot that ended up changing at the end. And one of the big elements that's in the book now came to me quite late in the writing process. So I'd written 3/4 of the book maybe, and then I was out walking the dog, and I had a sort of moment of, that's what it is. And I had to go back and sort of fix some of it. But what surprised me is I found that things that I'd put in earlier on before I knew that this was an element of the book still worked. It's almost like I subconsciously knew, even hadn't worked it out yet. So, I'm a pantser. I enjoy that sort of moment when you get a sort of slight thrill when you realise what something is, or when something connects that you haven't realised would connect. But it does cause problems. And the book I wrote after the Book of Doors took me 7 months because I was pantsing it, and for various reasons, I just couldn't work things out, and it was stuck and it was gumming up. And sometimes it flies. In Book of Doors, it'll pretty much flew. And it helps that I can type fast. You know, if you're a fast typer, it doesn't take you long to type 3,000 words. So as long as you know what you're going to write, I can usually do it pretty quickly. But pantsing is the way. I think if I was planning everything out, I would just be bored. That's not to say that you don't plan. When you're pantsing, I'm consciously thinking 3 or 4 chapters ahead, and I'm thinking where I want to get to. So it is a different sort of planning. It's a sort of planning on the hoof. You're not like going sentence to sentence, what will I do next? You are planning, and I do it all in my head usually, but I can't sit down at the outset and know every beat along the way and what each chapter is going to be. And I just don't think I could do that. I wouldn't enjoy that. I like writing like I'm reading, discovering the story as I go.
Yeah. What does that mean for your draft? Like, do you treat the first draft as a pretty rough thing, or do you end up with quite a polished thing at the end of that first draft? I'm so impatient, I just want to get it done. So my first draft is usually pretty rubbish in terms of the prose, but it's usually very good in terms of the structure. So I tend to think structurally. So if I can get the structure right, and that's the heavy lifting for me, the initial drafting, get the structure right, and then I'll go back and I'll edit it. So I would say my first draft is probably about 60 to 70% there prose-wise. The dialogue is usually pretty good, but the chunkier stuff that is harder to write, you know, the descriptive stuff, that takes more work and it takes a bit sort of a slower mind. So I'll get the structure done, get it all done, be happy enough with it, and then I'll know I have to go back and fix bits of it. So I'll read it through, and I usually go through. So I wrote it in about 3 months, this one, and then I'll maybe spend about a month revising it, and I'll go through it 2 or 3 times then. And sometimes I can't fix one thing because I can't get the right wording, so I'll leave it and I'll come back to it. So I'm going through it 2 or 3 times, and it's just, for me, it's that refining. It's almost like, I suppose the analogy is like a sculptor. You know, you get the rough outline of the thing you're sculpting first, and you go in and fix all the fine details and subsequent go over. So, but I think I've been doing it for so long. My first shonky draft is not too shonky; it's good enough.
Yeah. I mean, that must be a part of the skill of growing as a writer, you know, being able to put out multiple books a year, is that you kind of get your first drafts do get better and better. You do start to subconsciously learn the skill of, I am plotting this and pacing it better, and I'm setting things up which I know I'll be able to fix later on, but I'll deal with it. You know, and that's that kind of natural skill starts to come. You know, I'm to learn it.
And from scratch. Don't beat yourself up if it's not working. You know, if you've got to write 1,000 words or 3,000 words a day, and those words are rubbish, just accept them to be rubbish, and they're probably not as rubbish as you think they are. You're probably just having a bad day. and just get your words done, and then know it'll, you can fix it later. It's that old thing about you can't edit something that's not on the page. You have to get it down. Don't be a diva. It's just I'm not feeling the moment today. I can't possibly. The muse isn't with me.
Yeah.
Rubbish. Just write some words. Come back tomorrow and it'll probably be better. So that's the professional thing.
That you're right. That even when you think you've written rubbish, the next thing you think it's nowhere near as bad as I thought it was yesterday. No. It's this will do fine.
Yeah.
And what is your routine then? When you've got your 1,000, 3,000 words that you're trying to hit, you're still working a job, 9 to 5 job. How do you fit in your writing around your work?
I do it just whenever I can is the answer. So usually evenings, I'll try and do an hour or two in the evening after work. Sometimes in my lunch break, if I actually take a lunch break, I'll try and do some. Weekends become important, so I try and do 3,000 words a day. I don't always manage that, but it's probably around there on average. Weekends, I can try to do 5 to 7 if I'm really flying in a day. I have, when I was doing Book of Doors, sometimes I would lie in bed at night with my iPhone and notes typing, and I can do 1,000 words on my iPhone at night, and then I'll send it to myself and integrate it in the next day. So it's almost like guerrilla war. It's just whenever you can get some words down, and it goes back to the thing about I'm just so impatient. I want the thing done.
Yeah.
So the faster I can get it done, then, because for me the editing is more enjoyable than the actual getting words onto the page. If I can get it down, then I can spend a bit more time editing. So just whenever, and fitting it around the day job is hard, and particularly this past year when I was trying to write a follow-up book or a second book. And I was editing the first book and working full time. And because I've got 2 different publishers, although they shared the edit up to a point, there was a point where they diverged. So I had 2 different edits, 2 different proofread edits going on at the same time as trying to write the second book and working full time. That was a hard 3 or 4 months.
So there are 2 different versions of the book then?
Not really. So because it's Harper in the US and Penguin in the UK, and Penguin completed their edit like in spring. I think they were trying to complete the edit for international sales purposes. They were trying to get it into market. So they finished much earlier. And my editor in the US was on paternity leave, so there was a longer gap. So there isn't 2 different versions of the book, but there are variations around things like maybe odd choices of words over and above the sort of American English thing. There's minor changes around sort of sentence structure or choices of words or choices of phrases or dialogue. It's all pretty minor stuff, and you'd have to be pretty forensic to go through it. But I had to go through it twice because they had a separate process. I had to go, and they had a more mechanized process in the US. They had a proper, controlled document that I had to go through and edit and stuff. So translating the proof notes from the UK copy into the US proofread while also taking account of the US proof notes, that was a proper migraine-inducing sort of session. But again, it's the professional thing. You have to do it, and you have to do it to the timescales they need you to do it by. So I just had to get it done.
And having gone through that process now, I always wonder, maybe not for that second book because you were doing it while that was happening, but going forward, do you think your process or approach to writing will change at all as a result of what the sort of notes and stuff you'll get back? Or
I don't know. I don't think so. So I didn't get huge notes back on the Book of Doors. I got a couple of pages, and it was more of it was give me more of this than it was that's not right, fix it kind of comments. So that was quite nice. Hopefully that continues for future books, but maybe future books won't be quite as good. So I don't think so. I think I can only write the way I write. But again, it's that pragmatic thing. I will do what they need me to do. So I'm not going to try and second guess what they might ask of me. I'll just write the thing. It'll go through my agent. Agent will give me some notes. And then we'll go to the publishers and we'll see what they say, and I'll do what they need me to do to get the product over the line.
And am I right in saying that there's a film deal in the offing?
There's a TV rights that's sold.
Brilliant.
Yeah. So there is a production company in the US that bought the rights just before the writer's strike, which was nice. So then nothing happened for 6 months. Yep. And so the last I heard, I had a very glamorous phone call at one point. I was on holiday in Malaysia, and I had my film right agents in the UK, and the US production company had people in New York and Los Angeles. So I was doing this phone call from Malaysia in the middle of the night with these 4. It was very glamorous, the most glamorous thing I've ever done. But yeah, they've the last I heard, they'd appointed or identified a showrunner, and the showrunner was dead keen and was writing a pitch, and they were going to pitch it to studios and streamers. So it sounds optimistic, but I am very clear that, a tiny fraction of things that are ever optioned. I mean, we've got to the point of having a showrunner, which I suppose is reasons for optimism, but that doesn't necessarily mean it'll turn into anything. But it'd be great if it does. And I think the concept of the book, they were saying this to me, the concept of the book is good for TV because they don't need dragons. Apparently that's a big thing at the moment. They don't need dragons or big armies fighting, which means it's cheap or cheaper. And it's all set in contemporary settings. So, you can just film on location and it's not hugely expensive. And it's a sort of a concept that you could sort of spin off, and, it's an endless concept, really. It's almost like Doctor Who. You can go anywhere you want with it. Mm-hmm. So it's quite a good one for them to get in on the ground floor with. So hopefully it'll turn into something. I would love to, part of the contract as, consultancy, potentially in person if you need to. So if they want me to fly out to Los Angeles and have a conversation with them about some minor bit of the book plot, I'm very happy to do that. I will bear that burden. But who knows? It might turn into nothing.
Well, but yeah, let's hope.
Let's hope not.
Yeah. And you said you've been working on your second book. Have you finished that draft then?
Yeah, I had a bit of a fight with the second book. So I had both the US and the UK. It was a 2-book contract. And I kind of wanted the monkey off my back. So almost straight away, I was like, right, I'm going to write my second book. And I didn't know what I wanted to write about. So a bit like I always do, I just started. And I wrote this not very good thing over last Christmas. And I gave it to my agent. And he sort of said, no, this is not your second book. I mean, that's not the words he used. He was much more polite than that. But he was telling me what I needed to hear was try again. Yeah. So I went away, and it was last spring I started writing a second book, which is not a sequel, but it is a sort of a same wheelhouse sort of book, and that is Magic in Every World. And I finished that in October, November, I think, and it went to my agent, and then he's put it to the publisher. So the publishers have it at the moment, and I'm waiting to hear from them if they're happy with it, if they accept it as a second book. Hopefully they agree, because if they disagree, then it gets complicated. But hopefully they'll agree, and we'll go into the edit of that, presumably, and then I don't know what will happen after that. And if they don't like it, then I'll have to write something else, which again is the professionalism thing. I'll just have to give them a different book.
And there's no, I mean, you kind of mentioned it before, there's no downside really to having these books in the drawer, is it? Because there's, a year, 2 years, 3 years down the line, you come back to them, you pick up, even if you only use 20, 50% of the book, you've got a great basis there for something else in the future.
Yeah. Nothing is wasted. Yeah. And I said that to Harry when he gave me the feedback on the book that wasn't very good. I think he was trying to be quite nice about it because I think he was worried. But I said, no, it's fine. It's not wasted. I've still got ideas there that I haven't done properly, and the scenes I can use. And I did regurgitate some of the content into the book I then subsequently wrote. So nothing's wasted. It's either a book you can resurrect further down the line, or there's elements of it that you can copy and paste or take from and use in other ways. So it's not a wasted effort. And there is something I think about just retaining a sharpness. So I haven't written anything now for about 3 months, and I'm conscious that I'm a bit rusty. So not that it's like an Olympic sport or anything, but there is something about maintaining your sharpness of keeping writing and just being on the discipline of doing something every day.
I think that's right. I mean, I just think it's an easier thing to do if you're doing it every day or close to every day or whatever. Making it a habit is just something that makes it easier, because otherwise if you come back to it after, as you say, several months or something, it can be quite a daunting thing.
And it's hard. Even if you're good at writing, and I'm good enough to have sold a book, it doesn't necessarily mean I'm good at writing, but even if you think you're good at it, it's hard. So I wrote one book that sold, and I tried to write a follow-up, and it wasn't rubbish, but it wasn't good, and that shows how hard it is. Even if you've reached a level, maintaining that level or maintaining output that's good quality, it's not an easy job. It's a hard thing to do. It's emotionally difficult. It's psychologically difficult. It's exhausting physically to be writing. So it is hard. So the more you do it, the more sort of match fit you stay.
I think you almost want to be feeling that improvement as well, don't you, with each book? It's not just about maintaining it. You almost want to feel that you're testing yourself a little bit, or writing something a little bit different, or pushing yourself in some ways and not becoming stale. And it just adds to the kind of psychological pressure, I suppose, of being your own head and putting out a product.
What is a psychological pressure is, so I've had the sort of experience with the Book of Doors, which they always tell you not to expect as a writer. Don't expect you'll sell lots of books and you'll make lots of money. Not that I've made lots of money, but don't expect you'll make a fortune and you'll sell it. So I've had that sort of 1% experience. So I have to know that my follow-up book is not going to be as successful by whatever metric, because I've kind of reached that peak of sold lots of books, lots of interest, big launch. even if I write a book as good as that one, there's got to be a step down from that, because I'm a second book author. I'm not like a debut, and they love a debut in publishing. So you have to manage your own expectations as well as how you feel about your own book and what progress you feel you make. You have to be realistic about the wider world. Is that you're never going to be that debut splashy sort of hypey sort of author, buzzy author anymore. You're just that author who wrote another book, which is great, and that's fine. And maybe that relieves pressure, but trying to live up to that first expectations and thinking, well, I've got to give the publishers something that makes them feel like that investment they've made in me, that 2-book deal is worth it. Is my second book worth 50% of the money they've given me? I don't know, and I'm waiting to hear that. So that is at the back of your mind, is can you live up to their expectation, and are you going to be, are they going to be disappointed and be sort of slightly regretful of the money they've given you? So that all swirls around in your mind.
Emails every day pinging in your inbox saying all the writings that have been sold and all the big deals it made.
This new young,
exactly what new
absolutely. This 21-year-old person has a 6-figure deal for all that kind of stuff.
Like, I know, it's like an old man, but see when it's like someone's like first book and they're quite young and it's like a fucking 2 million deal, you think, oh Jesus, like,
people shouldn't be that successful at that age. That's my life. That's my view.
Well, but in seriousness, in all seriousness, in a way, just referring back to what you were saying there, it is quite a, I imagine for them it's even more difficult.
That's very true.
To be honest, when it comes to the second or third book.
Expectation.
But even I mean, if I had got the amount of money I got for a Book of Doors when I was 25, I would have gone mad. Mm-hmm. I would have been, buying sports cars and going on holidays, and I would have thrown in the job. And so I think having that sort of, just financially, that sort of level of success when I'm old and grey and slightly withered, you can be slightly more pragmatic about it. So I would have gone right off the rails. I mean, I doubt I would be ending up in a drinking drug-fueled mess, but I would have just gone crazy. I wouldn't have known what to do with myself. So there is something that comes with maturity, that a level of success is better when you can probably enjoy it a bit more objectively.
Yeah. Also, you say that, but you get your 2 million, they'd give you, $5,000 first year, next year another $5,000. It would take you about 50 years to actually get the full paycheck.
Well, I mean, so I got a very good deal for the US and the UK, and I think it worked out. It ends up being paid out over something like 4.5 years. So there's trigger points of publication, 12 months later, paperback publication, second book, 12 months. So it's not like you get suddenly your bank is full of hundreds of thousands of pounds.
And I suppose if you wanted to make that step into writing full time, you always need to wait like 3-4 years to build up a little cash of payouts, but to think, okay, I've got enough now, that's a salary or 2 years salary I've got sitting there, I could try it.
Absolutely, and I'm quite risk averse, but I've my deals are enough to pay off our mortgage. So for 18 months now I've been thinking, I can pay off my mortgage, but for 18 months I haven't been able to pay off my mortgage because the money hasn't come through, because it'll take 2 or 3 years for it to come through. So in my brain, I've paid off my mortgage and I can live a life of a writer, but day to day I'm still going to work and paying the mortgage. So it's that's the reality. But in some ways, having that predictability of income, I think, is good. Knowing that this money is coming for the next 3 to 4 years, that's good.
And you can only add to that, and if hopefully going forward.
Absolutely, absolutely.
What was the last book that you read?
So I'm reading one at the moment, which is an advanced reader copy of The Last Murder at the End of the World by Stuart Turton.
I just finished reading that actually myself. What's your thoughts on it?
Which is, I'm 100 pages into it, and it might be one of the best books I've ever read if it maintains the way it's going. I know that's high expectations, but it's great so far. I love the mystery. It's well written. It's very efficient. Really enjoying it so far. I read his very first book, the Evelyn Hardcastle one, which I liked as well. I didn't read the second book, but this one, loving so far, and it's such a beautiful book as well. The cover and everything's lovely. So I'm in the midst of that. And probably the last book I finished reading was another advanced reader copy. It was The Betrayal of Thomas True by A.G. West, which is his second book. He wrote The Spirit Engineer a couple of years ago, which was this.
I've seen the cover of that.
Really, but this is a really interesting book set, I think, in the 18th century about molly houses in London. These were sort of the guys who, go into drag, and really, really good book. That's coming out in July as well, but that's good as well. So both of those advanced reader copies, that's the joy of being a writer. People give you advanced reader copies to read, which is fun.
Brilliant. And what about the last film that you watched?
Well, I'm going to embarrass myself here. Probably the last film I watched was The Marvels.
Oh, right,
The sequel to...
I watched that a few weeks ago.
I've not actually watched it.
I have to say, I mean, I'll ask what you thought of it, but I went into having all this stuff I'd read about it being crap, and I don't think it was anywhere near as bad as I was expecting.
No, I agree. I enjoyed it more than I've enjoyed several of the
much
recent
better
Marvel
than the
movies.
last Ant-Man film, which I thought was pretty dire.
Oh yeah, yeah. And but I didn't mind the first Captain Marvel, and it seemed to not be liked by lots of people. But I didn't mind the first one. So, and the girl who played Miss Marvel, she was brilliant. She was really sort of charismatic. And
disagree on that point. I find her incredibly irritating.
No, you didn't like her.
She's the weakest part of the film.
Oh, I quite liked her.
She got better.
So
yeah, I don't know. Is that kind of hyperactive? I don't mind a kid character, but I feel like with Spider-Man they did a better job because they were like acknowledge the fact he's a kid and they're like, you need some training, go with Iron Man. Whereas here it was like, you're a kid, off you go on the mission. And I was like, Nick Fury, what? She's what you doing? She's in school, she isn't a superhero.
But she's had a whole TV series.
Yeah, that's true. I know.
Yeah,
that's true.
I've seen the TV series as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, I enjoyed that. But I'm going to see Dune 2 tomorrow. I'm looking forward to that. That's my first visit to the cinema for a long time. So. And the first one was great. I've not read Dune, despite trying many times, but the first film was fabulous. So I'm looking forward to that tomorrow. That'll be my next film.
I really liked the first film, except for the fact that it was clearly half a story.
Yeah.
Like in more ways than even Lord of the Rings or something like that. It just sort of ended.
Yep.
And it was a brave move, right? Because he didn't even have a second one planned or greenlit or anything.
But I respect him taking the decision, well, I can't compress this plot into 2 hours.
Absolutely. Yeah,
I'm going to do a film-length story, even if it ends halfway through.
Yeah, definitely. And what about TV? What are you watching on TV at the moment?
TV, so we finished watching recently Slow Horses, which is great.
Oh,
really loved it. Not read them, but they were great. We watched Blue-Eyed Samurai as well, which is an animation. That was superb. That was really good. And actually, what we've just started watching over the last couple of days is something I've never really watched before is Law and Order Special Victims Unit, which is on Netflix. Which is, it's very formulaic and it's, 26 episodes a year. It's quite predictable, but actually just watching it, the efficiency of the plot, to learn how to write, particularly TV writing, suppose if you look at that and see how efficiently they move, like the content they get into 40 odd minutes. And they also deal with because they deal like the sort of the police procedural and then they go into the law side of it and the prosecution, the sort of court case side of it. And they deal with, in quite a simplistic way, but they deal with quite weighty issues like, laws around abortion or gun control or social issues or mental health. And so they actually do try and deal with some of those issues in a way. But to get 46 minutes of a police procedural that has lots of twists and turns and then a court case usually at the end, although it's quite simplistic, it is quite impressive how well they do that in these sorts of things.
Watched it.
For it to have run for so long.
26 years or something. Yeah. It's crazy. And you would think, how many stories can you tell in New York about... But it's not always, but sometimes they have really surprising twists. And I'm usually pretty good at foreseeing twists and they catch me off guard. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting what they've done there. So yeah, that's it's an easy watch, it's an easy sit down for half an hour watch, but that's quite good fun. We've been watching that.
I've never watched it before, but it's a good point because every episode is half a police procedural and then or investigation and
pretty
half
much.
A court case.
They sometimes vary.
That is so you basically got 20 odd minutes for each strand. And
it's really fast moving, and they have lots of, and they manage to do this sort of personal stuff in between, like the characters have relationships, and so there are sort of slight overarching story arcs. So it's just really well done in the same way like crime scene investigations used to be, CSI, or even some sitcoms in America where they do these 26 episodes a year. They are a machine at producing good quality, efficient plot in 26 or 45 minutes. So it's an exercise in seeing how you can do that sort of stuff.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, the very, very last thing we do is a super quick fire either or, and I always say there's no right answer here apart from one, which obviously I'm pretty sure you should know what the correct answer is. I'm expecting that answer at the end, but we'll start off with two authors that I know you're a fan of, Stephen King or Michael Connelly.
I'd probably have to say Stephen King because he's got a greater variety. Mm-hmm. Like he doesn't just write horror, he writes a whole load of things. Where Michael Connelly is excellent, but he writes the same thing very well over and over again. And I can hoover up Michael Connelly's, enjoy every one of them. But I suppose for the variety, if I could only want it to be Stephen King.
TV or cinema?
I would like to say cinema, but I like sitting around in my pajamas with a cup of tea and being able to pause it if I need to go for a pee. So probably TV. And my TV screen these days is probably about the same size as the cinema. TV.
Night owl or early bird?
I am a night owl to the point where I need a mother to tell me to go to bed. I'll stay up randomly scrolling TV channels, not actually looking for anything, just
sleep
just because I don't want to go to bed.
I think they call it.
Exactly, sleep procrastination. That's it. Yeah, night owl definitely.
Music or no music when you're writing?
I don't need music. I don't think I've ever really consciously written to music. I have written with the TV on in the background sometimes, but I can write in silence. Probably silence is easier for me.
And the last one, and some would say the most important one, real book or ebook?
Right. So until about 2 weeks ago, maybe a month ago, I would have always said real book. I've never had an e-reader. And I love the tactile feel of books, and I love the weight of books, and I like going on holiday with a bag full of books. I'll take more books than clothes. However, about a month ago, I had to do an advanced reader copy that was only available on EPUB, so I got myself a Nook.
Okay.
And it's particularly with my old eyes, the ability to look at text and make it the size you need it to be able to read comfortably, the lightness in your hand, be able to read after dark and all that kind of stuff. I can sort of see the appeal of an e-reader. I will still say book though.
Come on, are you after that?
I like it.
I will still say book
tease.
because books have been around for centuries and they feel so good and
you couldn't have the e-reader of doors.
No. So, but I do see a place for e-readers, and I have slowly, and probably when I go on holiday in a few weeks, I'll take my e-reader rather than a bag full of books, I guess.
I mean, it sounds to me like they're kind of neck and neck here.
Yeah, grudgingly, I would. I mean, I don't want to like e-readers, but I'll probably grudgingly, like an old man, accept. But I don't think they'll ever replace books. I think that moment where they might have replaced books has passed. I think they serve a different purpose, and books will always be books. You don't get your Illumicrate shiny special edition.
No, exactly. Sprayed edges and all that. Sort
yeah,
of
exactly.
Yeah, exactly. So close to him deciding ebook there, Tarek, but ultimately went with the real book.
It was quite
like
a
all
tease.
sensible people.
I think he knew what he was doing. He took me right up to it and then just threw me away.
But no, thanks to Gareth for coming on to the podcast. That was a really interesting chat, and I think a good chat about the importance of persistence, of I guess good old Scottish pragmatism in terms of writing, not being put off by your first book not selling, just writing what you need to, and also very prolific when he does start writing. Writing the Book of Doors as quickly as he did, writing 1,000 words on his iPhone at night and stuff like that.
I don't think I could do that. Maybe I don't know if you tried. I mean, it's a really. I mean, I guess it's a good thing about nowadays. And we always say you don't need much money to be a writer. And you don't. You can use anything to write. The barrier to entry is low. But yeah, it's really really impressive being able to just tap out 1,000 words on your phone like that. That's fantastic.
Yeah, it's not something I have tried yet, but yeah, no, thanks to Gareth, and obviously you can pick up the Book of Doors now. As we said at the start, it's already doing phenomenally well, and I'm sure it will continue to do so. So, go and grab a copy of that. And next week we have another great guest.
Oh, that's nice to hear. And next week we're chatting. We're also another Scottish.
Yes,
guest.
indeed.
Eliza Chan. She is a speculative fiction author. According to her website bio, she writes East Asian mythology, British folklore, and Reclaiming the Dragon Lady. Very exciting. And her debut novel is Fathom Folk, which came out just February 2024, so just a few months ago at the time of recording, and has been a massive hit, straight to number one.
Hit number one on the bestseller chart, which was
fantastic,
pretty incredible. So please do tune in for that chat. But if you've enjoyed today's episode, please do take the time to rate and review us on your favourite podcast app, as that always helps us to continue to get these great guests on the podcast.
And of course, if you want to get in touch, you can drop us an email, which is podcast@rightgear.co.uk, or you can find us on just the biggie social media ones. Don't bother with the Blue Sky. Just search for
we are on Blue Sky,
UK
that's
page.
okay.
Yeah, we don't bother with it. No one's there.
It's more Mastodon than I've given up on.
Oh yes, I forgot that even existed. At UK page one on any good or bad social media platforms. You can drop us a message there, or as you say, an email. But otherwise, have a great week, and we'll speak to you next episode. See you later.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode. If you did, please leave a comment down below, hit that thumbs up button, And be sure to hit that subscribe button as well so you never miss an episode like these ones below.
And if you want to get in touch, you can always drop us a tweet in the Twitter machine, which is at UK Page 1, as evidenced here. And our other social media channels are available.
Otherwise, we hope to see you next episode.
See you later.